In the very beginning, so like immediately, I treated myself. So I put on 2 tourniquets. One of my teammates eventually got to me. He put on a 3rd tourniquet. In that moment, right there and then, man, I knew I was dying. There was no question in my mind. That was it. This is where it ends.
You are now tuning in to the Roughnecks Podcast with your host, Cole Nixon. Much love.
What's up, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Roughnecks Podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you guys about Desert Fox Golf. I've recently partnered up with them, and they have some awesome products that you definitely want to check out. They have something called the Phone Caddy, which is the best phone holder in golf. It comes in many different colors, and they even have ones with funny sayings on it, like, I work to support my golf habit, and it takes a lot of balls to play like me. If you are like me and like to use a golf app while you're playing, then this is the thing for you, because it holds your phone in a convenient location right on the golf cart. They even have a cigar holder attachment for it. One of my favorite things is their drink aid tumblers. They have these awesome 17-ounce stainless tumblers with a screw-on lid to hold your favorite beverage while playing around a golf. They have different versions from the classic swing aid to nurse aid, hunting aid, fishing aid, and my personal favorite design, the Patriot Aid tumbler. Head over to desertfoxgolf.com and use the promo code Roughnecks for 10% off your order. But let's get into today's guest. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Roughnecks Podcast. This is episode 157, and joining me today is an awesome guest that I'm super excited to dive into with. So without further ado, Nick Lavery, welcome to the Roughnecks Podcast.
Cole, how you doing, brother? Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get you on here. We just talked a little bit before, just the crazy things of being on the road, and you're a busy person, so I'll try to keep this as short but as detailed as I can also. But I like to kick off my episodes by allowing the guests to kind of give a background on themselves. So tell the Roughnecks listeners who you are.
Right on, man. Name's Nick Lavery. I'm active duty member of the United States Army Special Forces, where we are more commonly referred to as the Green Berets. I've been doing this now, coming up on 16 years, which it's wild when you just say that out loud, how fast it goes by. And, and I love what I do. And I put that up really early because it's important. As you know, you and I will start talking about some experiences in some more detail. A lot of the roads lead back to that. And a lot of the questions that I'm asked often also leads back to that. I love what I do. I consider it to be amongst the greatest honor anyone can take on, is to dedicate themselves to the protection of a society in which they represent. And it's something that I not only take extremely seriously, but I have a genuine passion for it and a deep connection, a deep sense of purpose behind it. Originally from Boston, Mass. For those of you that haven't already figured that out, spoiler alert. So you're going to hear, this kind of accent for the next hour and a half or so. And then last, but certainly not least, actually most significantly to me, is married. My wife's also active duty Army, and we have 2 young boys. Oldest is 5. The youngest will be 2 actually on St. Paddy's Day. So in like a week. And yeah, man. Other than that, we'll get into some of the more detailed stuff, but I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, you're from Boston, and the first thing I got to say about you guys from Boston is you're die-hard sports fans, that's for sure. I just had to, kind of get a little bit of crap in there because my roommate is originally one of my roommates from college was from Mass and die-hard Boston, New England Patriots and all that kind of stuff, and I'd always give him crap, but he's like, dude, you're from Ohio. You Ohio State fans are just completely different breeds, and you Cleveland Brown fans, you guys are diehard fans for a team that doesn't even win games. And I'm like, yeah, that is what it is.
Hey, you know what? That deserves respect, brother. Fair weather fans is something that something that I didn't grow up in. Like you said, with diehard, win, lose, or draw. So good for you, man. That's something to be proud of.
Yeah, actually, I was just watching the Ohio State basketball game, pacing back and forth because they have somehow miraculously made it to the Final Four of the Big Ten tournament, and
Yeah.
they were the second to last seed. And I don't know how they've even made it this far. But you actually played some. I played college football. You actually played some college football yourself, correct?
I did. Yeah, I went to UMass Lowell, it's a D2 program. Played outside linebacker. No.
Why? I always like to ask, people's decision, because I have a lot of college people, like athletes on, and like, why the decision to go there? Because I feel like that's very important in my audience. I feel like I have a lot of, athletes and younger athletes listening. Why the decision to go there? Like, what was the ultimate deciding factor?
Yeah, it's a good question. The short answer, I think, is it was a new program, so it had only been the football program at U Lowell had only been around at that point during my senior year of high school for maybe 3 or 4 years. So it was new, it was under development. They just built a brand new stadium. There was a lot of opportunity for me to get more playing time earlier in my college career. And they did a great job with their recruiting. They brought me up there. I went on, I think it was 5 recruiting trips, which was the max, at least back then, that you could go on. And they showed me a great time. So I knew that from the football perspective, I thought it was a solid play. And then I would also have, let's say, an enjoyable college experience at the same time.
Yeah, I wanted to ask too, do you feel that college football helped prepare you for life? Or like for your future endeavors that you went on to do? Do you feel like college football had, obviously it doesn't prepare you for everything, but I feel like it helps prepare you for life. Can you attest to that?
I would agree with that 1,000%. This is actually a really great question and talking point. I'm not sure if I've ever spoken on this publicly. For me growing up, man, athletics was the one thing that I had to rely on that gave me something positive to do. Me and my family, we moved every year as a kid growing up. And a lot of that had to do with my parents and them struggling financially and just grinding. They had us really, really young, me and my younger sister. So they were doing what they needed to do, but I was in a new spot every year. So I was the new kid in school every year, all the way up until I got to high school. And that's really hard, man. That's really difficult. I struggled socially. I struggled to keep friends, obviously, because I was in a new place every year. I was picked on. I was bullied, which back then wasn't taken as seriously as it is today. Like bullying is a pretty big deal now. Back then, it was kind of just, being a kid. But no matter where I lived, there was always athletic programs for me to get into. So it gave me something to do that was positive. And that became my anchor all the way up through college, So I went to private high school because of their athletic program. So I was given a great academic education because of sports. Even though I was a horrible academic, I still was in that environment. And then the only reason why I went to college was for athletics. So even just from like the time I was a really young person all the way up through me being a grown man in college, sports really facilitated all that. And then in terms of preparation for the rest of life, I would argue that also is there as well. Really, regardless of, I think, what you do. But for me, eventually deciding to come into the military, as a Green Beret, small team environment, team. That's the key word, And I did team sports and I did more singleton sports like wrestling and boxing. But that team dynamic and then, the structure and the discipline and the work ethic and kind of these character traits and tenets that come with athletics, even at the youth level, but certainly once you get up into the NCAA, these systems and ways of thinking and ways of living day-to-day life are ingrained in us. So I would attest a lot of my success to my time in sports, because that's really what began building the foundation in which I was able to build upon once I left school and began doing what I do now.
Yeah, I agree 100% because I went to college for the same type of reason. Like, I only went to college because of athletics. I played football at a small D3 school, but it was one of those things too. I feel like when we're in sports, we don't realize like some of the dumb things your coach make you do or the dumb things your coaches are saying, you're like, whatever. And then you get later in life and you're like, man, I remember that time that coach said that. And like,
Mhm.
it doesn't affect me then, but it really affects me now. And I understand why they had us do it. And it's just crazy the things like, that's why I feel like it's a very good thing to have your kids, or, if you are a high school, middle school person listening, to go play a sport. Like, you don't have to be the one on the field playing. Yes, you want to be, obviously that's what we all strive for, but just go play sports, because the things you will learn through those sports, that team environment especially, can help you so much down the line. And like, I mean, it helps on your resume a lot of times, where people are looking for people who played sports, because they learn a lot of valuable lessons that'll help in the workforce.
100%, man. And I don't think anything can replace parenthood or guardianship, right? Or like whoever is looking after us as kids. The parents are essential, but having a coach, right? Someone outside of mom, dad, or your guardian or your grandmother, or whoever looks after you day to day, having someone outside of that is telling you what to do, and your job is to listen to them. Like that right there prepares you for life, right? Like people are going to be telling you to do things a whole bunch of different ways at different times. So that alone right there, I think, the discipline, respect for authority, having that mentorship outside of what exists within your home, I think also brings tremendous value. And if you can do that with some kind of consistency, then it does set you up for success.
But you ultimately made the decision later to go join the military. What was the driving factor that made you join the military? Like, what was it that made you join?
9/11. I mean, I really just answer the question right there. I'll give you more of the story. Is I had looked at the military in high school because, again, I lacked direction. I was a horrible student. I had sports, and that was kind of it. And I really yearned to be respected. I yearned for strength because I struggled socially. And the Marine Corps was kind of an idea that I had. Actually, I met with a Marine Corps recruiter. I think it was my sophomore year of college, of high school. And the only thing that deterred that was me getting recruited to play football in college. So the only reason, again, why I went to college is so it's kind of put the military thing on hold. Went to college, was playing ball, and then my sophomore year of college was 9/11. And, those of us that were old enough to recognize the gravity of the situation that we were witnessing, it's a moment that none of us will forget ever. I'm certainly in that same camp myself. And I can remember sitting in my dorm room watching Americans make the decision between burning to death in a building or jumping out of one live. And just the amount of rage that was being sent through my body was pretty powerful. And, I knew where things were going to go. At least I was really confident that we were going to respond militarily to this in some fashion. So I really struggled, Cole, to stay in school at that point. I was ready to drop out. I went and talked to my advisor. I'm like, I'm done. I'm joining the military. I'm going to go fight. And he was like, whoa, like, you're clearly pissed off. Like, this is not a great time to make any major decision, is when you're pinging in the red. So just like give it a day or two and just think about it, which I did. I listened to some friends and some family and some other mentors. And ultimately, I decided to stay in school and grind out my degree. And then I began looking at options to enlist. So 9/11 was without question the catalyst for that decision. But it was something that was kind of buried within me, years prior.
Yeah, it's weird to, like, not weird, but like, everybody, I feel like, no matter how old you were at the time of 9/11, everybody kind of remembers it. Like, I was only, I think, 3 years old when it happened. And, I still like have these like just little memories of like my mom and dad like crying and like things. And
Wow.
I'm like, what is going on? And it's like, but I was like 3 years old. Like that's like all I can remember. But like everybody remembers that moment, and everybody had anger, like you talked about, and sadness. And it was something, I feel like a lot of people, and you hear about it, where like the day after 9/11 and stuff, there was a ton of people that were ready to sign up. Like they wanted to do it now.
It was crazy. And that stayed the way that stayed that way for years. because 9/11 obviously was in 2001. I didn't commit until 2007. And even when I was looking to commit, there were lines outside of military recruiter stations, because not only at that point, we were surging in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And so people were still very emotional and angry and wanting to contribute and wanting to serve, even, 6-7 years after the event actually happened. And I'll tell you, man, and thank you for sharing that with me, Cole. I don't think I've actually talked to anyone that I can recall that was 3 at that time that has flashes of memories of that. That's actually quite amazing. What's even more amazing is that I'm serving alongside people in the uniform today that literally weren't alive when 9/11 happened. So it's still it's amazing, and a lot of them are still coming in because of that. You have a conversation with an 18-year-old kid, like, hey, why'd you want to be a soldier? And it's like, hey, 9/11 can still come up as a reasoning for that, even though these people weren't alive at that point. And I'll just say that, the tragedy of September 11th, 2001 will go down in history. But I got to tell you, the weeks and months immediately following that I don't know if I've ever been as proud as I was in those moments to be an American. I mean, instantaneously, all of these things that to this day, create this divisiveness amongst our society, disappeared. They were just gone. I mean, political affiliation, gender, race, religion, like, it didn't matter. I mean, there was the phrase we had, "United we stand," and that was just everywhere. And people were just joining together as Americans, and it was really beautiful. It was amazing to be able to be a part of that at that time.
Yeah, I mean, you saw Bush throw out the first pitch at a baseball game, and there's still videos of that today going around of, hate the guy, love the guy, what other political affiliation you have. That was like United We Stand. That is exactly what that was at that baseball game. Everybody was, united. It didn't matter none of the other factors mattered. All that mattered is we came together as a country. And sometimes I feel like we might need that today, and throughout history, but it is what it is. But it sucks sometimes that it takes that for us to come together. But it's just 9/11 is definitely something that will never be forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
But this kind of leads me into, I read your book, Objective Secure. Awesome book. I really have to say, I highly recommend it to anybody listening. If you have not read Objective Secure, I have it beside me and I had it marked up. There's a ton of things that I loved about it. I wanted to ask though, what was the reasoning behind writing the book? Why did you decide to end up doing it?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, man. So I have to fast forward a little bit through some stuff that we'll probably talk about. But in 2015, I deployed back into combat, back in Afghanistan as an amputee. That was the first time that I went in as a one-legged guy. And it was a historic moment. It was unprecedented. It hadn't happened before. So when we got back, the Army, SOCOM, my unit, really wanted to highlight the success that we did collectively. Right. This is like anytime something happens for the first time, it's like, wow, this is a really great thing. So I was being thrusted into, interviews, and I was talking to people out of Washington and like senior leaders, and I was really uncomfortable with it. I wanted nothing to do with the dog and pony show. I despised it. But when a 4-star general asks you to do something, like, he's not really asking you to do shit. Like, you will go do that. That's your job. So I begrudgingly was doing these things. And there was one particular event where a bunch of policymakers from Congress were at Fort Bragg, and they were talking about our strength and conditioning program that was asking for an increase in funds to expand the program. And the general asked me to come and talk to these people about what this program is capable of doing, and me being an example of that, which I did. At the end of that, this was the USASOC commander at the time, General Cleveland. He's like, hey, dude, I realize that you hate this kind of stuff, but what I want you to just think on is that this isn't about you. This isn't about you and you seeking the limelight and you looking for fame and recognition. Like, I know that. Everyone in this room knows that. You're a Green Beret. You're on a team. Like, that's your job. That's all you want to do. But this isn't about you. This is about the impact you can create. This is about the support you can bring to those beside you, those coming up behind you that are struggling with some kind of adversity, whether it's the same type of thing, a physical injury or not. Like, you have an obligation to them. And that was the very first catalyst moment where the light switch had been turned on. It really wasn't shining bright in my face, but that was when it turned on for me. And then so gradually I began kind of putting myself out there a little bit more and more into social media. And it was conflicting for me. I was like, I don't know if I like this, you know, the general's got a point, but very slowly that began to happen. So I'm getting more like followers and people are more interested and I'm getting more messages and things are coming out. And I start getting asked the question, you know, how did you do what you did? Which is a fair question. Like, the first time anyone does anything, people are interested. Like, how did you do that? So I'm answering people one at a time, like boom, 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 just like off the top of my head, answering. Well, eventually that grows to the point where I'm getting that same question like thousands of times over the course of, you know, a couple of years as I began to kind of get out there more and more. So at one point I just decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to answer this question on a Word document purely for efficiency, just so I can have a faster way to respond to people, where rather than me writing this thing out every single time, I can just copy, paste, send, and then there you go. So it was purely based on efficiency for me. And then secondary to that was I felt like I would give the end user, you know, a better product, something with more reflection and more thought and a little bit more analysis. So I did that. I spent maybe over the course of a couple of weeks just outlining what my process was. And it was literally just like a step-by-step guide that I just kind of came up with through a lot of reflection and analysis. And man, I got to tell you, I grew a lot and learned a lot about myself by doing that. I was having conversations with teammates, my strength coaches, my dietitians. I was checking my training log. I was checking my journal. I was researching into things. Came up with this step-by-step guide, and I used it that way for several years. And it was very effective. People were like, wow, thank you. This was like awesome. I'm like, cool, man. Everybody wins. Faster for me. You're getting something better. Boom. We're good to go. Well, fast forward from that point to 2020, right? Just a few years ago. And it's July of 2020. And now we're like peak COVID, right? Like, everything's shut down. The gyms are closed. The fight houses are closed. We're doing like a weird half on, half off work schedule. You know, everyone's trying to figure out how to remain productive in this environment that we're living in. But so I have a lot of extra time and energy on my hands that I otherwise would have been spent in the gym or in doing jiu-jitsu or at work or, you know, whatever. Well, one of my best friends, we play college football together. He hits me up and he's like, hey man, I think you need to write a book. I mean, out of nowhere, Cole, this dude just like out of nowhere. I'm like, what? I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? He's like, no, I've been thinking about it. I think you need to write a book. I think I just hung up on him. I'm like, I'm not having this conversation with you. But I ended up giving it a little bit of thought. And again, I got all this extra bandwidth on my hands that I don't do well with. Like, I get antsy pretty fast. So I hit him back and I said, you know what, dude, I have this Word document that I've been using for the last like 4 years. And I know it's effective. Like, the feedback on this has been tremendous and it's helping people. I think there's something there. And he's like, I think you just found out what your book is about. And he didn't come into that pitch with any kind of specific topic in mind. My initial thought was I would write like an autobiography. I would like write, you know, like the Nick Lavery story or whatever, which I had no interest in doing, and I still don't. But that type of project is one that I knew I could sink my teeth into and I could get a lot of value out of for myself. So I just committed to it. And, you know, we were deploying into Iraq that December. So I gave myself that like 90-day window or so just to see what I could come up with. And I kind of already had an outline. So I just began adding more and more and more and more to it. And man, I caught the bug for this thing. It became like my obsession to the point where there were times I was jumping up out of bed at 3:00 in the morning, and I just had to go write, which is wild to even still say that now. Because if I was writing anything up to that point in my life, it was because I had to, whether that was for school or for work or like whatever. I was not a writer. I had no interest in it at all until I started doing it about something that I had a passion for. And then I couldn't stop myself. So I got to the point where I was hammering down like 500 or 600 words a day. And over the course of what ended up being just like 3 months, I ended up sitting on like 70,000 words. And next thing you know, it's like, wow, this is actually kind of a book. So I tell that story, man, because, it still very much is exactly what it was intended to be with that, 9-page Word document 9 years ago. It's the exact same thing. It's a guide that I used to return back to my lifestyle. And it's a methodology that I still continue to leverage to this day in pursuit of, my next achievement.
Yeah, it's crazy you talked like you didn't want to write an autobiography, but I look at it as like a blueprint to life, like of kind of how to figure a lot of things out. And what I like about it is like you give the blueprint, but you relate it to things that, were for you. Like you said, it was something that really helped you, but it makes a reader connect like, oh, all right, here's what it is. Here's how you use it, or here's how, you misuse it and like mistakes you make. And that's what I really liked about it, because it makes it really easy to understand when you're going through like, all right, he's saying you need to do research, but then you kind of go into like what you did, the goods and bads, and go off of that. That's what I really like about it. Just going through the book when I was reading it.
Yeah. And thank you for that feedback, man. One of my favorite pieces of feedback I get from people who have read it is it sounds weird, but it's like, dude, I was aware of everything that you put in this book. Like, there's nothing revolutionary that's in this. I didn't like create fire and I'm like telling you how to build it. It's things that most of us are familiar with. It's work ethic, it's discipline, it's structure and strategy and tactics. And like, I may use some verbiage that may be unique to us in the military. But these are things that most people are familiar with. But what brings me quite a bit of joy is when people are saying, because the way that you explained it, it helped me resonate with how I can leverage that in my day-to-day life. You didn't really teach me something new, but you equipped me to leverage what I already know or what I already do, just at a higher capacity or with more efficiency.
Yeah, and one of those things we will get into a lot later, of one of the things in the book that really made me think and realize like, oh, I'm doing this. And then you kind of talked about it, but we'll talk about that later. I kind of wanted to go into, before we get too much further, so people can kind of really understand your story. In the book, you talked about how you were injured, not 1, not 2, but 3 times. Kind of take us through those 3 injuries, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So in 2012, in September of 2012, my team and I, we went in Afghanistan. We went into Wardak province, which is known for its resilient and capable fighters. I mean, those are some resilient people going back to like the dawn of time in that area of the world. So we knew we were going into a hornet's nest, which is exactly the place we wanted to go, right? So we got exactly what we wanted. It was a highly kinetic deployment, literally from day one, and it proved to be the type of mission that we all signed up for. I was wounded on 3 occasions during that same deployment. The first one was really just a few weeks after we had got there. And I took some grenade shrapnel to the back of my shoulder, which blew about a lemon-sized hole in it. One of my teammates plugged it, compression or pressure dressing, wrapped a base bands around it. Like, it was good to go. It really wasn't that big of a deal, which sounds like I'm being tough and, machismo, bravado. But, in that type of environment, in that context, right, machine gun rounds are going off, rockets are zipping over our heads, right? We're in a full-blown gunfight. Adrenaline is just surging. It didn't really cause any kind of pain. It was more just like a shock, like, oh, shit, I have a hole in my shoulder. That's not supposed to be there. But other than that, it really wasn't that big of a deal. But what I'm grateful for about that particular injury, this was really the first kind of significant injury that any of us received. And it was an eye-opening experience for all of us. Like, whoa, we're human beings. And like these things that these guys are shooting at us and throwing at us and dropping at us and things that are blowing up around us, like they could kill us, right? And it was like a wake-up moment for us, like, whoa, okay, we're not invincible, which is important, I think, to know that as warriors. So that was the first one. You know, it took me out of the fight for about a week. And then I was back to work. You know, I would bleed through my dressing, you know, usually once or twice a day. It was fine. You know, I got medics there on my team with me. We'd patch it back up and just keep working. The second incident was about 6 weeks after that. Yeah, because we were in November of 2012. We were coming back from an operation and our lead vehicle hit just a massive IED, just decimated our lead truck. I was in the trail vehicle working out of a hatch. So it happened right in front of me, you know, about 300-400 meters in front of me, but it was catastrophic. It was during that engagement, which was an ambush, you know, it was a full blown complex ambush that we drove into, that I was wounded for the second time. And I took an AK-47 round to the face, which sounds a lot worse than it was. I got really, really lucky, you know, really just grazed my cheek, split me open. It looked nasty. It clipped an artery, so it bled quite a bit. But I didn't actually know that I had been shot for like hours later. And one of my teammates was like, dude, you're like gushing blood. And then it wasn't until I was eventually in front of a doc hours after that they were pulling out little shavings from the round inside my cheekbone. So that was the second time. Again, similar to the first, I got stitched back up, got put back together. They kept an eye on me at Bagram for a few days, and then I was back with the guys right after that, right back to work. And then the third time was towards the very end of our deployment. So now we're in March of 2013. Same deployment. And actually, ironic timing, tomorrow will mark the 10-year anniversary of this incident. Sometimes those of us that were wounded critically refer to this as our alive day, meaning that like a day that you probably should have died, or at least could have died. That's tomorrow. So 10 years ago tomorrow was when this happened. And this was the result of what we refer to as a green on blue, which is a military way of saying an insider attack, which means that a guy that we had been working with, in this case, it was a member of the Afghan National Police Force, he turned against us and he opened fire into me and my team with a truck-mounted, belt-fed machine gun from about 25 feet away. So just a catastrophic incident, which was the initiation of another complex ambush. So this guy cracked off his gun, and then immediately we began receiving fires and rockets from outside our perimeter from about 25 enemy fighters. This was their Super Bowl moment, right? I mean, we had been kicking their ass for 5.5 months. And these guys know what our deployment cycles look like because they see us coming and going on a very, oftentimes very continuous schedule. So this was their chance to like push us out, right? Knowing that we're about to leave. So they brought the house down on top of us. Most of the damage to me was to my right leg. I took what was estimated 4, maybe 5 rounds, severed my femoral artery, shattered my femur. I took a round to my lower left leg as well, which I didn't even know about for weeks later. In the very beginning, so they immediately, I treated myself. So I put on 2 tourniquets. One of my teammates eventually got to me. He put on a 3rd tourniquet. In that moment, right there and then, man, I knew I was dying. There was no question in my mind. That was it. This is where it ends. I know how severe a femoral artery cut is. And without direct pressure on that artery, chances are you're going to bleed out. So this is where it ends for me. And I'm asked, often like, what's that like, laying on the battlefield, bleeding out, dying. And I went through kind of a roller coaster of emotions. For me, it began with frustration because I knew this was coming at the hands of somebody that I had been working with. So that was really tough. That was a tough pill to swallow. From there, I moved into a place of guilt where I felt bad for what my family was about to experience. I had the vision of, some general handing my mother a folded flag at Arlington, and I felt bad about what they were going to experience. But I did know that they knew that this is a warrior's death, right? Like they know that about me, that if I'm going to die, it's going to be in combat next to my brothers. Like that's the way I want to go down. So I felt like that would give them at least a little bit of relief, but I felt bad for what they were going to experience. But kind of working through that brought me to a place of content because I did adopt and live by this come back with your shield or on it mentality. That's what it took for me every single day to go do the work that we had to do, was that exact philosophy. So I was quite content. It was annoying and frustrating that it was going to be at the hands of a guy that I taught how to use the gun he shot me and my friends with. But you know what? I'm okay with this. About an hour and a half later was when I was eventually loaded on a medevac bird. Because of the ongoing firefight, they couldn't risk landing the bird until we got the situation on the ground under control. Medevac bird comes in, I get loaded onto it. I get medevaced out. They send us to an outpost that had what we call an FST, which stands for a forward surgical team. And I need blood desperately. The fact that I'm still alive at that point actually kind of defies the laws of biology, but I was still clinging. I needed blood. They put me on a transfusion. Some time goes by, and then my entire body begins to crash. And they're not quite sure what the problem is, but they know I need to get to Bagram immediately to get to the actual hospital. And it's while I'm flying to Bagram. So they load me back on a helicopter. They send me to Bagram, that they realized that they had given me a transfusion with an incompatible blood type, which is catastrophic if you do that on someone who's perfectly healthy. For someone who's really already should have been dead, it's an absolute disaster. So everything, was dying. The med crew on that medevac bird, these guys got real creative and real aggressive with techniques to keep me clinging to life. And they were successful at that. So, I arrive at Bagram and I'm intubated, dialysis, transfusion. They amputate my foot immediately. At that point, it was pretty much dead. Machines kept me alive for about 3-4 days. And then, and then I kind of came back.
What was, you kind of talked about all the mental aspects of like during the fight of everything that you went through, but when you came back, what was like the immediate mental stuff that you kind of obviously like, you're trying to figure out what even happened kind of and what's going on, but mentally what happened like when you came back?
So in like the immediate moments of me kind of coming to, and I'm in the intensive care unit at Bagram, my first thought was, all right, I'll be back to work in like a week. Of course, this was like absurd. I was still like in critical condition and it could die at any moment. But, I had been wounded twice before and I had been somewhat conditioned to getting wounded, getting injured, getting medical treatment, and then getting back to work. And I can still remember that first thought of, all right, like, I don't know what's wrong with me right now. I just know I'm in the hospital again, but the doctors are going to figure out what this is. They're going to patch me back up, and then I'm going to go back to work. So that was my immediate thought. It really wasn't until I arrived at Walter Reed about 4 or 5 days later that it dawned on me that, okay, this is this is a bit of a different situation than the two prior.
Yeah, because you ended up, losing your leg, and you end up making your way back. what was your ultimate decision of, instead of just kind of folding, I guess you want to call it, and, people wouldn't bat an eye if you decided, you know what, I'm done with it. Like, I can't, like, I lost my leg. I can't get back. No one would have batted an eye, but your mindset immediately was to get back to your team, after even already kind of, right as you woke up, still trying to figure out, but then also like you went through that spell of where you just talked about where, this is a little bit more serious, but you still ended up going back to your team. What was, the mindset and the draw, like what drove you to want to do that?
Yeah. So on the surface level, it's stubbornness, competitiveness. No one was going to dictate my future but me, right? Just kind of on the periphery. At a deeper place, I know my purpose in life. I know why I'm here. I know who I am, and that is one of a warrior. Like I opened with, what I'm put on this planet to do is to defend a society. And I know that about myself. So even once I realized that my leg was gone, and actually at that point, they were still like incrementally amputating it piece by piece by piece over the course of like 40 surgeries. But I know my leg is gone, or at least a good portion of it's gone. That didn't change who I am and my meaning in life, right? On like a philosophical level, but also on a psychological level. Like, this is who I am, this is what I do. So that enabled me to completely bypass the what am I going to do question, which is where a lot of people get stuck, whether that's on the offset of some kind of traumatic event or just some adversity or some kind of failure or whatever. It's like, well, what am I going to do now? That was never a question that I had to answer. I knew exactly what I was going to do, which enabled me to just go, all roads lead to how, which are two different things. I know what I'm going to do. I have not a clue as to how, but this is an equation that can be solved. This is an equation that can be solved. At that point, I didn't know that it hadn't happened before, but it was irrelevant to me then, as it is now, right? Like, being the first to do it, I could not possibly care any less. I was just that confident that there is a way to do it. There is a way to answer the how question. This is an equation, and there's just a bunch of different variables and constants, like in any math equation. I just got to figure out which ones go where and in what sequence. So not only did that enabled me to begin doing the things I needed to do, but it kept me focused on something positive during all of the trials that were coming down the road, in the moments when I was sometimes literally face down on the ground, and all the doubts coming in, and all the fear is coming in, and all the concern that maybe I set the bar too high, or I bit off more than I can chew, or, is this even realistic? Like, I'm not immune to those. I'm not immune to those immediate reactions on the offset of something bad happening. I experience that stuff every single day. But when I would get into that little space, even if it was only for a second or two or 10 minutes, I was able to grasp onto, this is your purpose. So there is no question about what you're going to do. You've already answered that. So forget about it. Just figure out what just went wrong just now, learn from that, reapply that knowledge, and then go again and again and again. Like, you will figure this equation out if you just commit to it.
One of the things you kept mentioning is like you already knew your purpose. I wanted to ask you kind of what you thought of, I feel like that's what a lot of people struggle with, is finding their purpose, finding their why, or what they're supposed to do. How do you think somebody kind of finds their purpose and finds, their gift in life, or what they're, destined to do?
Yeah. In Objective Secure, I touch on this, I think, briefly. I have two recommended courses of action, and it kind of goes against what a lot of coaches, mentors, influencers, a term I can't stand, will throw out there. It's different from that. My first recommendation is really to rely on internal reflection, internal dialogue. like letting your soul tell you what your purpose is. That's a lot easier to say than it is for that to happen. And then certainly when it comes to executing on that, it's going to be really, really hard. But let yourself determine what that is. And, to enable that, it begins with developing an internal dialogue. And for me, that's literally looking myself in the mirror and saying, what do you want to do? Who do you want to become? And then just listening and letting your soul answer that question or those questions for you. But what I've learned is oftentimes that answer is not going to come just blasting through the mirror and punching you square in the face. It'll likely show up in the form of a whisper. It'll be very quiet and very subtle. So if you're not listening, if you're not actively listening, then you may not hear it. And in order to be actively listening, you have to put it out there. And this isn't, the law of attraction and spirituality and like all that can play a role. I'm talking about literally asking yourself these questions, then listening for the response. And knowing that it may not happen immediately is something that we have to commit to and deliberately work that in to our daily rhythm and our scheme and our practices. I like that as the first mechanism to determine. The second is what most people would say is preferred, and that is focusing on your talent, right? And this may end up being, by all means, the way to go. And I'll explain why I put this too. Focusing on your talents. And to be very clear, talent and skill are two different things, okay? Talent is inherent skill. Talent comes naturally to us. Skill is earned solely through thousands of hours of hammering down on a particular craft. Focusing on our talents, right? The things that we do best with the least amount of effort, those are our talents. So by focusing on those, chances are that it is connected to our purpose. It is likely connected to something we are passionate about. And it will set us up statistically for success. Because we already do this pretty good with minimal effort. If I layer on skill, earned skill on top of talent, the likelihood of success will obviously go up. The reason why I put that as number 2 is, let's just say that I wake up one morning or I'm having this internal dialogue every single day and something talks to me and says, you know what would be really awesome is if you start building homes for people. Your soul I want to build homes for people. That's what I want to do. That would give me great fulfillment in life. Well, let's just say that happens, but I can't stack 2 blocks on top of each other without them falling over. I can't hammer a nail into a board without smashing my thumb. I have no carpentry skills. I have no engineering skills, nothing. But there's something inside me that's saying, no. You were put on this earth to build homes for people. Who's to say that you can't do that anyway, even though you have zero talent associated with that? I would argue no one can fucking say that to you, which is why I like to put that up front. I put that, the second option there, focusing on our talents, because eventually we're going to have to start executing. Day after day, week after week, a month after month, a year after year, like the clock is going to keep ticking. So at some point, we have to start actually doing. And for me, the identification of my purpose, that came as a result of me doing, right? What I'm recommending is really not the route that I took. I just started doing things. I said, I'm going to go into the military because I'm pissed off and I want to get some vengeance on this thing. It was by the act of doing that I realized, 1, I love what I do, and 2, this is what I'm put on this earth to do.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of it does start with internal. Like we all have that little voice in our head, that little whisper, like you talked about, that's telling us like, you should do this, like you should do this. Like we have it there. It's there for all of us. But I feel like we you talked on, like, you have that doubt, that fear that, maybe I'm setting the bar too high. I don't know how to do this. Like anything today is at your fingertips, especially with the internet. Like if you want to learn how to do something, it's there. There's a YouTube video on how to fix a Honda. There's a YouTube video on everything that you want to know about. And, like you may not be great at it now, but like you talked, it's through the art of doing, like literally just putting yourself out there and learning how to do it. Like when you joined the military, you didn't know exactly what you were doing at first. Like, I mean, it's the same as whatever you go into. Like my job, when I went into installing pools and patios, I had no clue what I was doing 4 years ago when I started this job, but I've learned it through through doing it, you learn how to do things. And that's the biggest thing, is like, it's out there. If you want to do something, our purpose is there. We know what it is, but I feel like a lot of us are scared because we also listen to the outside factors of people telling us, oh, you can't do that. Like, you don't know how to do that. Or, I had people telling me, like, you started a podcast. And now I'm 157 episodes in. So like, you have these outside factors, whether it's internal or external, that are telling you you can't do it, but use that. And I think you talk about this in your book, of like, use that self-doubt, that, external doubt, everybody telling you can't, as motivation to go do it, because, no one thought you were probably going to be going back and as an amputee, and you were the first, obviously you were the first one to ever do it. So it's available. It just takes doing. It takes your effort if you want to go do it.
Yeah, dude, you bring up so many great points here, Cole. I mean, one, you hear this quite often. It's like, stop caring what other people think and just do it anyway. And that's really easy to say, and it looks great on a bumper sticker. Because we're human beings, we are social creatures, and we are driven by emotions, right? Like Dale Carnegie says it best in his book. Human beings are not people of logic, we're people of emotions. That's absolutely accurate. There's an emotion attached to every single thing that we think and do. And we're social creatures. So it's easy to just say, like, stop giving a fuck what other people think and just do you. But that goes against us as human beings. It's wildly unnatural to do that. So for one, I want your listeners to just realize that it's okay that you feel influenced by external factors. That's part of being a human being. That is quite normal. That's quite normal, which is why that influences most people to play it safe or avoid the risk or avoid overextending out of fear of judgment externally. That's perfectly natural. That said, those that do end up living their purpose, those that end up achieving greatness, elite status, etc., they're living unnaturally in a lot of ways. Like, they're the unusual ones because they're willing to actually do that for real. And it's hard. It's hard to do. It's simple to say. It's simple conceptually, but it is really difficult to do because it goes against a lot of the realities of us as human beings. My best piece of advice when it comes to this is something that I had to adopt when I was in the hospital, is becoming extremely comfortable in solitude. Extremely comfortable in solitude. Again, easy to say, hard to do. And this does not mean just intentionally isolate yourself from the world with the, fuck the world hoodie on with the hood and just like bury yourself in this like cocoon, right? The support that I had during that process and through today was essential in enabling me to do all the things that I needed to do. However, when it comes time to people believing in what you believe in, that is where you're going to have to separate yourself and be completely and totally fine with your commitment to a belief, your commitment to a path, your commitment to a goal, regardless of who else around you believes in you. And take their support when it's offered. Go out and find it. Find assets to leverage, teammates to onboard, assets and allies and coaches and mentors. Like, go find these individuals because they will enable you to move faster and more efficiently and be more productive. But if at any point someone's like, dude, what you're talking about is crazy and will not happen, hey man, no problem. Thank you for that. But I'm locked in on this, right? And a lot of people, they live through their spirituality and through their religion. And I ask people, do you believe in God? Yes, absolutely. Awesome. Okay, great. If tomorrow every single other person on the planet overnight became an atheist, no one else on the planet believes in God the way you do, would you still believe in that God? Yes. Okay, like that's exactly what I'm talking about. It doesn't mean that you just write everybody off necessarily. You can still have your family, your friends, your coaches. You just believe in what you believe in, and you're okay with you being on an island with that belief and being able to execute with those people around you, even though they don't necessarily believe in what you believe in.
Yeah, I mean, you have to cut, like, you don't have to cut them out exactly, but you do have to kind of sacrifice some things in a way for your goals, for all your dreams. And you talk about that in your book. When you were writing the book, even, you gave up kind of watching football sometimes, to where you're like, man, I could sit here, spend a couple hours watching a game, or I could go in and, work on my book and work on my goals, work on the things that I'm looking forward to. And, people are going to call you crazy. And there's the cliche quote of, if people aren't calling your dreams crazy, then you're not dreaming big enough, or whatever it is. But I mean, it's kind of the truth, because I've had so many people on that have talked about it. And, the most recent is a guy who I went to college with. He's a videographer now for the NFL and for Ohio State football. And, he told his friends and stuff, like, I'm going to be working for the NFL one day. And they all laughed at him, like, yeah, okay, dude, like, you go to a D3 school, like, you're not going to make it to, like, the biggest stage of football. And especially, he was a baseball player. He wasn't a football player or anything. He just really liked videography. And then he ended up there. And it's use that as motivation. And you're going to have people telling you it's not possible. But like you said, you don't have to write them off. Just kind of be like, you know what, thanks, I appreciate that, but that's not my mindset. But that's the big thing. And it's easier said than done. When those people say that, don't take offense to it. Like, you can't let that deter you away from your dreams and your goals, because I feel like that's what happens with a lot of people. And, I'm guilty of it myself. We've all done it, where, people tell us, like, it's not, that's not possible, or you're not going to be able to do that. But there's plenty of people out there that have been told that. You're a prime example of, it's not possible for you to go back to combat after losing your leg, and you still did it. So you don't have to write them off, like you said, but use that and just keep moving forward is the biggest thing.
Well, I think it's important to also keep in mind that with some of this external, judgment, where's that coming from? And oftentimes, one, it's coming from a place of love, right? Like, this person cares about you and they don't want to see you disappointed. So recognize that. Two, it could also be coming from a place of resentment. Perhaps they failed at something and stayed down, and you grinding and driving is reminding them of their failures or their self-perceived inadequacies. And that's just being projected on you because you're driven towards something. Having a recognition, if it's one of those two things, which I experienced, was important, because I was able to see that. If it was coming from my mother, who's like, it's like, you love me. You don't want to see me. You don't want to see me fail. You don't want to see me hurt. I respect that, right? I don't need to cut you out of my life because of that, because I know where this is coming from. Hey, okay, Ma, thank you for that input. I appreciate it. I love you. I'm going to go back to work. Or if it's the guy or person who's just coming at it from more of like a hater perspective because they're feeling inadequate. Hey, man, thank you. Are you struggling with something? Like, let's train together. Like, what are you working towards? Like, knowing where that's coming from, I think, is important. And then lastly, because we kind of talked about cutting people out, there may very easily come a time when that does have to happen, and that's a really difficult decision to make. I had to make it several times where just the negativity or just the anchor was just so constant that I was like, you know what? This is not in a place that I can maintain this, because it's derailing me. You're an energy drainer. You're draining my life force from me, and having to make that really hard choice of removing that individual from your circle. And now we're kind of talking about the power of the community that we surround ourselves with, but it's absolutely there. Cutting out, an hour of Netflix a night is pretty easy compared to removing a relationship from your life. But it may get to that point. You just have to ask yourself, if I maintain this relationship with this individual and I am unsuccessful, and that is what I determine to be a big part of as to why, how solid of a relationship are we really going to have moving forward? My resentment may very easily be so built up that it will be a worthless relationship anyway, versus sacrificing that in the name of your mission and living your purpose and pursuing your dream? Are you okay with accomplishing that? And then looking back on, man, I wonder what would have happened if I had maintained that friendship or that relationship. I've made that choice, several times. It was really hard to do. I can just say that I look back at that with no regrets. So again, one of those things that's easy to say, easy to talk about. In real time, it can be much more difficult. But there's this kind of cliche expression that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And although statistically it may not be 100% accurate, theoretically and conceptually, it's dead on balls accurate. So be very deliberate about who you invest in, and just know that you are absorbing their strengths, weaknesses, their attitudes, their mentalities. And you just have to make those really hard choices.
Yeah, it's crazy that you say that, because I just had a recording last night where we talked about the same exact thing, like with the 5 people. And, it's not 100% accurate, but like if your 5 closest friends are millionaires, you're more than likely to be the 6, because you are absorbing, like you said, you're absorbing their habits and what they do. You're learning from them. And it's good to surround your community is a big part of who you are, because who you surround yourself. I mean, they told us the first day when we moved in for football when I was a freshman. I remember the first thing I heard, and it still stuck with me today. And it was mainly directed at the freshmen. But the first thing they told us in that first team meeting is we had a saying, y'all, which is you are who you associate with. And it was mainly, being in college, you're going to get those distractions, those temptations to make some wrong decisions. And being in a smaller school, our football team had eyes on us at all times. Like we were, the biggest group on campus, we had eyes on us at all times. So we had to kind of be careful of what we were doing, outside of, the football world, and not to get us in trouble. But and it's a big thing. If you're surrounding yourself with these people that are essentially better than you, it's going to help you go further in life.
Yeah, man. I mean, I talk in the book about allies, just from a terminology perspective, and just everything you just said, so accurate. And deliberately putting people alongside us to grind with and work alongside of that are better than us at things, it enables us tremendously. There's the expression, if you run a 100-meter sprint with people that are slower than you, barring something crazy happening, you're going to win like 99 times out of 100. But if you start competing same sprint against people faster than you, you may lose 100 out of 100, but your time is going to go up, because you're going to be digging in just that little extra deeper to try to keep up with the people that you want to impress, your friends, your teammates, your whoever. And that kind of concept is absolutely accurate. What prevents a lot of us from doing that is really our ego and our pride, and just being the loser frequently can just hurt us. But if we can get past that and recognize the tremendous value it brings to us by intentionally being one of the slower people in the race, that get past that hurdle, dude, things skyrocket if you can take that humility and bury and live it and own it and it be authentic. Man, you'll watch things just absolutely skyrocket.
Yeah, and you've spoke on it, and it's been talked about. I think I've said it over 100 times on this podcast, but you will learn more from your failures than you ever will your successes. Your failures, the defeats, losing, that's where you learn and grow. Kind of speak on that and how it, how that affected you.
Yeah, it took me, I'll say embarrassingly, but I recognize that it's hard, a while to recognize what you just said, to be without question accurate. I grew up competitive. I grew up with a chip on my shoulder. I grew up an athlete, and I always had something to prove. And I was the guy that never lost at anything, which of course is inaccurate and relatively immature as well, I would say. It really wasn't until I began going through this process of getting back to the team, getting back to my lifestyle, that I was able to modify my relationship with failure. And I learned what you just said, that that is where the wisdom is located. And it's just something that most of us are again, familiar with. It's like when you get it wrong is when you're like, oh, okay, yeah, now I see like what I did or what I didn't do and that's why I failed at that particular task. It has to hurt, though. Like the pain is what brings about the desire to, or the need to learn to avoid that happening again. Like it has to be uncomfortable. And I think that's what drives people to avoid that quite often, is the emotional damage it does to getting it wrong and failing, the external judgment that comes with that. But again, you can get past those roadblocks. You can get past the pride ego. You can take on the humility and then just see the value in messing it up. As long as you learn from it and then reapply that wisdom, and you do that again and again and again, you're creating a weapon. I mean, like you're creating a human that is capable of literally anything. You may tell me that every time you get knocked down, not only are you going to get back up, but you're going to get better. And you just do that again and again and again and again and again. How do you stop somebody who lives that way? I would argue that you can't.
Yeah, I mean, you said it has to hurt, and that like literally sparked a couple, vivid memories in my mind from my football days of, there was 2 times in my football career that I vividly remember, like it hurt that we lost. And like, once was in high school when we lost to a 1-8 team and we were 8-1 and lost conference. And, it's one of those feelings. And the other one was in college when we lost a game. And if we'd have won, we would have been conference champ. It's the same type of thing, but it hurts and it makes you learn from it a lot more. And, but going off of that, you can't just give up when that happens. And that's one of the things that from following you on social media and reading your book and, watching your TED Talk and those things, like you learn through you. And there's 3 things that you speak on a lot, which is I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat and I will never quit. Kind of take me through those and, what those mean to you.
Yeah, there's actually a 4th tenet in there as well, which is I'll never leave a fallen comrade. And those tenets are referred to as the warrior ethos, which is derived from the soldier's creed, which is a mantra that is literally buried into your head from the day you show up to basic training. And I've just used those 4 principles, those 4 tenets as a framework to create what I refer to as the warrior mindset, which is the first section of Objective Secure. Each of those tenets, and there's a lot of military language in there, obviously that's where it comes from, but they all really translate into one word each. And for those of your listeners, this is where you get your pen out and I'm going to ask you to write down 4 words and then dissect what those are. I'll always place the mission first is discipline. And there's a reason why that is at the foundation of this mentality, because without it, you're done. The game's over before it even starts. There's a lot of talk on motivation and the value of motivation. I often get labeled as a motivational speaker, which is okay. Motivation is for me, what I do is a byproduct. Like I'm a coach, I'm a mentor, I'm a teacher, I'm an advisor. You will be motivated, chances are, when we get done working together, but that's not my goal, because motivation comes and it goes. It's a blip in time. It's short term. I need you to be operating with or without motivation. And that quite literally is discipline. So I'll always place the mission first as discipline. It's a combination of sacrifice and time prioritization or time management. What are you willing to give up in order to put what you want most before what you want now? So I will always place the mission first is discipline. I will never accept defeat is resilience. And we talked about the relationship with failure, which is buried within that. Like mental toughness, being willing, can you take it on the chin and sometimes lose and recognize the value in going through that and extracting that wisdom and knowledge and ramming it back into your process and going again and again and again. So I will always place the mission first, discipline. I will never accept defeat is resilience. I'll never quit is persistence. Okay. Which there's an overlap between persistence and resilience. Okay. Persistence meaning I'm going to keep moving forward in the face of adversity, which is, of course, also tied to toughness and resilience. But where persistence becomes unique is continuing to move forward, not only in the face of adversity, but in the face of success, in the face of milestones, in the face of achievement, right? This concept of satisfaction does not exist. Even when you reach that ridgeline, yep, congratulations, go to a nice dinner, crack a couple beers with your buddies, whatever you do, but then zero in on the next objective. Because the second we stop growing and stretching and striving, we're no longer living life. We're just waiting for death. All right. So persistence is that third one. And then I will never leave a fallen comrade, in the literal terms, is one that we take extremely seriously in the military and in other communities, that I will not leave you behind under any circumstances. What that translates into is the word commitment, an unbreakable, non-negotiable contract that we establish with ourselves, an authentic willingness to do whatever it takes, which is a bumper sticker slogan as well. Easy to say, much more difficult to do. But that is what that ethos is translated to me. It's a commitment. And again, it's knowing that belief, hanging on to it in the face of doubt, external pressures, internal questioning. No. This is what I'm going to do. This is unwaverable. This is non-negotiable. Just like we will come get you and bring you home on the battlefield. So those 4 tenets, man, they break down into 4 words: discipline, resilience, persistence, and commitment. And if you adopt those philosophies and dig into what they mean and begin living them tactically, like through physical execution, I can't just stay in the conceptual. I can't just stay in this, theoretical 30,000 foot view. How do you take that and apply it day to day with what you're doing with your body, your actual actions? Are they in line with those 4 methodologies of life? Man, you begin operating mentally through those 4 tenets. I don't know. I don't know what becomes impossible at that point.
You talked about with the I'll never quit, and even through the face of success. And if you stop then you're stopping your progress because you're living in your comfort zone. No progress is made in your comfort zone. So if you stay in your comfort zone, you're not growing. Even if you think you made it, you have everything you wanted, you're not done. It's not over yet. Like, you still have a lot of things to do. And, you kind of touched on it in the book as well. And sometimes and you talk about how, doing the hard things first too, when you have all these things that you have to do. I think the first thing you do when you wake up is your flexibility stuff, which you said you hate to do, you don't like doing. Kind of take me through why you do that first.
Well, I want to highlight because it's right next to me. I'm rereading the Book of 5 Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, who's considered one of the greatest samurai swordsmen ever. And he talks about in this book that even the elite, even the masters, their pursuit of mastery never ends. And this is the way of life, which is exactly in line with that idea of persistence, even in the face of milestones and victories. To answer your question, it's doing the things that we know bring value, whether or not we want to do them or not. And that's another definition of discipline. For me, I tend to, and I seek to front load as many of these things as I can do. One, because it really sets up that day for success. If I begin my day doing the thing or things that I want to do least, by no means are we coasting for the rest of the day, or it's not just downhill like the rest is going to take care of itself. But by definition, everything else beyond that will be easier because you did the worst thing that you had to do first. So there's a methodology and there's a reason behind front loading that kind of stuff. And then second to that is, the rise and grind mentality, right? The importance of waking up at 3:00 in the morning. And, you hear this a lot, and there is value in that. For me, and what I challenge people to leverage is the time of day really is almost irrelevant. And it's really more dependent on your particular life and schedule, right? Because if you stay if you're not waking up at 4 a.m., you're a loser, or you will be unsuccessful if you're not waking up. Well, what about the people that work third shift? So that's not an option for them. So does that mean that there's like no way for them to achieve greatness or become successful or whatever? Like, it's obviously ridiculous. Most of us in this society, right, work like a 9-to-5 type routine. Therefore, the early mornings, what it really does is it buys you a chunk of time to dedicate to yourself, right? Where you can prioritize yourself guilt-free, because the rest of your priorities haven't started yet, right? Like your family obligations haven't started yet. Your professional obligations haven't started yet. You just carved out a window that you can dedicate to yourself. That's the real value, right? That's the real value in the rise and grind type mentality. It's the window for you to invest in you, which is incredibly important. And a lot of guys in the military struggle with that. Like, we live by this selfless service code, which is part of what makes us successful. But if you're not prioritizing yourself, I mean, you'll be worthless to your teammates, your family. Like, you need to be in a good place for yourself. Like the classic cliche is, you know, in the aircraft, when the oxygen mask comes down, like, put yours on first before you help like the person next to you. It's like, if you're in a bad position, like, you're not going to be any good to them. So the routine for me is essential, because it allows me to do the really difficult things that I really don't want to do in a window of time that's put there deliberately to focus on myself.
Yeah, one of the quotes that I highlighted in your book was, "You cannot win the war against the world if you cannot win the battle within your own mind." And that starts with prioritizing yourself. And like, yes, it's good to have your family time. It's good to, you know, spend time with friends and stuff. But, you know, we've all realized those times that we fell away from ourselves. Yeah, like, we're out having fun with our friends and we're spending every night with our family. But like, if we don't spend any time with ourselves and having those, you know, those internal conversations, you can fall off track easily. But you also talk in your book about, you know, Monday's not the only day to start. It's not the only start time. Kind of take me through that thought process, because I feel like, and I'm guilty of it myself, but that's what a lot of people like, oh, I'll start on Monday because it's already Wednesday now, so I can't start tomorrow. Kind of take me through that thought process and like your thoughts on it.
Yeah, you know, I'll use some language because this is the way I used it, and it's fuck Monday, you know, or if you want to make this PG, it's forget Monday. Forget Monday. But you know what? Leverage the fact that most people will wait till Monday. And that's where, you know, that's where the new job starts on Monday, the new workout routine, the new, like, I'm going to get on track Monday. And that's not just random. Like, that's the start of the week. It's the start of the new journey. Like, it makes sense. Knowing most people do that automatically gives you an immediate advantage on everyone else. If that's what's happening. If it's Wednesday, like you just said, if you start tomorrow, you just bought yourself 3 days, like period. I think it mostly comes in line more so when we fail, when we fall off track, you know, when life gets in the way. Like, life doesn't cooperate, okay? I don't care how disciplined and dedicated you are, how driven you are. Life does not cooperate. Life is going to throw you off track, which is why that quote you just said is so important. Like, you cannot win the war against the world if you cannot win the battle within your mind. Like, the world is not going to cooperate with you. But it all begins and ends upstairs with our mindset. So when you get knocked off track, when you eat the entire pepperoni pizza, even though you know you weren't supposed to do that, when you do that, when you fail, when you make the wrong choice, that is your chance to get back on track right there and then. And it's difficult to do, but leverage the guilt, leverage the fact that you know you just messed up. You know that almost comes immediately following like the mistake. It's like, it was really good while it was going down, and like now I feel like crap. I'm like, if it's a pizza, I'm bloated, but more so it's like, man, I just like undid some work that I'm working myself out of. Like, leverage that, like lean into that discomfort, lean into that feeling of letting yourself down, and to be able to get back on the course right there and then, or at least as soon as humanly possible. So the Monday thing, I understand it. But like with anything, it just also brings about an opportunity. If most are doing this, if you're inclined to do that, it opens up a window for you to take advantage of if you have the ability to dig in and do it now.
one of the things too that I really want to dive into, kind of going off of this, was, you kind of talked in your book about how you were hitting good numbers at the gym, you had good grades, everything was good, but you still weren't happy. Something was off. And, I relate to that with, I recently kind of went through like falling off track essentially, because like I have these 15 things that I need to get done today, but I only got 14 done. So I'm pissed off. Or even if I do get all 15 done, I'm still, something's not right. Kind of talk about how sometimes I think people overfixate on things, and how do you handle that of you got these things accomplished but you're still not happy? How does somebody get their way through that?
Yeah, so that realization for me came really before I started like journaling like deliberately. So I had my training log, which was like sets, reps, grams of protein, that kind of stuff. But slowly I began adding more to it purely for the sake of physical performance. And I began adding more emotionally driven data points, right? Like, how am I feeling? And that was just like a quick blurb at the bottom. And I maintained that, lethargic, or I feel, weak or tired or unhappy or, sad, or I'm angry, or like whatever. Purely for performance, right? I wasn't on this journey for therapeutic value. It was performance driven. And I found myself, as I was going back and doing my analysis, being like, man, I'm hitting like a PR every week. Like, my times are getting faster. Aesthetically, I'm coming in the way I want. Like, my nutrition seems to be dialed in. Like, on paper, everything reads like I should be beaming. But I'm looking at my notes at the bottom here, and it's saying, tired, disgruntled, aggravated. And I'm like, what's the problem here? And that opened up my journey into journaling, like, as a deliberate and specific thing, and becoming more in control of and aware of my emotions. Like, prior to that, man, like, the idea of thinking about emotions was like soft. It made me uncomfortable. Like, I'm a football player. I'm an MMA fighter. Like, I'm a Green Beret. Like, emotions don't exist in me. Like, I'm an animal. I'm a cyborg, right? Like, this is not for me. This is like kittens and rainbows and kumbaya shit. It's not for me. Living in a place of ignorance, because again, like, emotions are wrapped within everything that we do. And that began my journey into learning more about that, and recognizing, as is referenced in this book as well, the warrior is very much in tune with his emotions. He just has them under deliberate control and can manipulate them at his need. Like, that's like next level thinking. That's like deep thought. It took me a while to kind of go down that road. So while milestones and PRs and goals are without question essential, if we're miserable the entire time during that process, then what's the point? Because the milestones aren't bringing you happiness, man. And finding that place of happiness and unsatisfaction at the same time, that's a powerful 1-2 punch. I'm living life happy, but I'm also unsatisfied. Like, I want to be better. I want more. I want to grow. I want to achieve, but I'm also happy. So the importance of enjoying the process, I think, is critical. Enjoying the process just as much, if not more, than the prize itself. Yes, we're target fixated. We have these milestones. We have these objectives. That is the way I think. That is the way I live. But I've also found a way to be happy during that. Happy, yet also unsatisfied.
Hey, you bring up journaling, and it's a thing I've talked about a lot on this podcast, and a lot of my guests, actually the one I recorded with last night, has been journaling since he was 9 years old. And it's something that, like you said, like our emotions, being a football player, being a man, really, like that's not who we are. Like, we don't think about that kind of stuff, but I feel like that can make us fall off track and live unhappily if we do not sometimes, get our emotions out there. And you don't necessarily have to go talk to somebody about it. Sometimes the best way for somebody to do it is just writing their thoughts down, writing down what's going on, whether it's good or bad, I feel like it can help kind of manage those emotions. And like you said, you have to be able to manage your emotions because that will make you better. Otherwise, it can hurt you.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I talk about journaling as much as I do is because I come from this, hyper type A environment and community. These savages, and the idea for many of them to go home and write in their diary just makes them uncomfortable, even just thinking it or saying it. Right? It's this like weak thing that 12-year-old girls do, and I'm like, I got it, man. I hear what you're saying. I was in that same camp for a really long time. Rather than looking at it from the perspective of a therapeutic and a way to increase your EQ, your emotional intelligence, which is definitely rooted within performance. But if you're not there yet, attack it from an analytical perspective, like you would a training log, which is the way that I grew into it. Just use this as a tool to be able to annotate data, whatever data is you want. If you're just beginning into this process, any data that you think is relevant, whether it's emotions or not, or anything, just start documenting stuff and then leverage that tool for performance or for whatever it is you're trying to do. That is what I would recommend, is like the initiation into doing that, because there is an undeniable value that's been proven many, 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 many times over in writing things down. And that could perhaps be the one way in which you get emotions out of you. So it's not this cesspool that's boiling and it can eventually explode. But then you also have something to reference that you can take advantage of. Use it as a tool and commit to it. That's my challenge to your listeners, is commit to it. Carve out 5 minutes a day and just see what comes out, and just use it as such. And I'm willing to bet that over time, you will see the value that it has within our emotional control, which is directly tied to our ability to perform, and the shortening of the window between an emotional reaction and our deliberate response. That window becomes much shorter as we increase this ability of awareness and manipulation.
Man, we've had a lot of great stuff, but this kind of leads us right into these final segments of the podcast, which I'm super excited about. But I do have a question that I like to ask all of my guests, and it is, if you could go back in time and tell your 16-year-old self one thing, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. My 16-year-old self, let me see, man. At that point in life, I was a scared, confused kid with no direction, a lot to prove. I would probably tell myself, or at least try to educate myself on the power of patience. And I'm really careful with this word, because it becomes a very slippery slope for a lot of people really, really fast. And it translates into what ends up being procrastination, like just kicking the can down the road because they tell themselves they're being patient. Patient is really nothing more than recognizing that things are going to take time. Things are going to take time, even when you're going at it aggressively every single day. It's still going to take time, right? Telling my 16-year-old self, like, it's going to get better. And if you remain true to your values, or at least at that point, if you begin to develop sound values and a level of integrity, and you live by that, and you're willing to go against the grain and forget trying to impress people that you probably won't talk to or even know anything about 10 years from now, and remain true to that and focus on what you know is right, and you can be patient and live within that solitude and live with being judged or being confused. At the end of that road, you will be in a better place. And it's a skill. Patience is a skill. So if I could go back and begin learning that skill earlier, I think not only would that have helped me in the short term, but also, in the longer term.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned, the difference. There is a difference between patience and procrastination, because I feel like a lot of people do confuse the two. and they are just kicking the can down the road instead of like you can go at things. But we live in such a world too that I think it's like, so we want instantaneous results. We want it to happen now. And it's hard for us, and whether you're 16 or 40, like you're going to have it. It's hard to develop that, that skill of patience. But it is a big thing, is no matter what age you are or where you're at in life, if you can begin to develop that, it will help you immensely as you continue through your journey of life.
Yeah, well said.
But this moves us into the best segment of the podcast, which is Motivation Monday. Motivation Monday is the point in the episode where I allow the guests to give the Roughnecks listeners a little inspirational bump to set the tone for their week as they listen on Monday morning. So what do you got for Motivation Monday?
Well, we kind of already talked about, the whole Forget Monday thing, but we're here. All right. So, hey, we're here. So, we can remove that entirely because we're here. Here's the day that you've had in your mind or not. But either way, like, here we are. I would say life is not a dress rehearsal. We have one shot at this. And believe me, I've been on all sides of death, and it can end at a moment's notice. This is a gift. Life is a gift. Like, statistically, the likelihood of us being who we are right here, right now, is as close to the definition of impossible as it gets. This is a gift, and it's not one to take for granted. And you get one crack at it. Why not go at it hard? Why not just leave it all out on the field? Like, it's going to end. We're on this ride, and we will all eventually die. While we have this gift of life that we've all been given, why not leave it all out on the field? Like, really, like, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose? A lot of us, it's easy to get we feel trapped in our way of living and our responsibilities and obligations, and we're living this just mundane 9 to 5, 5 days of misery for a 36-hour distraction. And like, that's just no way to live. I would argue that that's not living at all. There is a way, right? There is a way to wake up every day happy and fulfilled and aggressive and ambitious. There's a way to do it. I'm living proof of that, as many people around the world are. It's not something that is exclusive to people that are born with some magical power where they can live their purpose and live a life of passion and happiness and also remain unsuccessful or unsatisfied in their pursuit to develop. There is a way. The question is, are you willing to take the calculated risks? Are you willing to live comfortably in solitude? Are you willing to believe in something, whether or not anyone else around you does? Are you willing to make the really hard choices about who you surround yourself with? And of course, are you willing to make the really difficult sacrifices that are going to be necessary to battle through the adversity that's coming and dig in and live in that manner? It's not easy, but it is an option for everybody. And why not go at life that way?
Yeah, because we talked about it a ton on this podcast in general of, I'd rather not be sitting on my deathbed saying, what if? Like, what if I'd have done this different? We all have those things that we are looking at right now as you're listening or wherever you're at in life of, man, what if I would have started this earlier? You always have those what ifs, but where you're at right now in life, why not start now, like you've talked about? And like, why not? You don't have to wait till Monday. Yes, this episode comes out on a Monday, but like, you don't have to wait till Monday. Fuck Monday, like you talked about. Get after it right now instead of saying what if later in life. Get after it right now, and down the line you'll be. And even if you don't, it doesn't work out the way you wanted it to, like we've talked about a ton already on this episode, where you're going to have those failures, you're going to have those setbacks. If it's maybe you tried something and you realize, man, I really don't like this. Guess what? Yeah, you failed at it, but you learned from it. That's what happened, is you learned from it, you grew from it, and you found out what you do and don't like. And that is the big kind of puzzle that you go through in life of, you have all these things that you try and they just don't work out, but you learned real quick, just like we learned not to touch the stove when it's hot. Like you don't touch it, and it's no different than if you tried a hobby that you thought you'd like and then you ended up not liking it. You learn what you like and don't like.
Dude, what if is a powerful couple words, and what if comes from our brain oftentimes, and that is, what if I fail? What if things go wrong? Looking at it from a risk perspective, what if the bad thing happens? What if the question also comes from your heart and from your soul? What if I pull it off? What if I can pull off just a fucking miracle? What if I can become more than what I ever thought was absolutely possible? Can you listen to the what if coming from deep down inside? Can you listen to that over and over and over again? What if? Yeah, there's risk. There's risk assumed with anything. There's risk of doing it, and there's risk of not doing it. There's the risk of what you mentioned, that fear of regret, looking back going, oh man, like imagine if I just tried. So what if you pull it off? How about that question? What if you pull it off? What then? That powerful, man. It's an option.
Exactly.
It's an option for us all.
Exactly, man. And with that, that's a wrap on yet another episode of the Roughnecks Podcast. Nick, thank you for coming on. I truly do appreciate it. Where can people find and follow you on social media, and also find your book?
Yeah, easiest spot is our website. It's machinenick.com. It's got links to all the socials, to the books, to other merch, and all the things.
I will be putting those links in the episode description if you want to find them through there, or just go find them yourself. Definitely go read the book. Definitely follow them on social media. You will not regret it. And lastly, I want to say thank you for your service. I truly do appreciate it. And thank you for being an inspiration to not only me, but people around the world.
I appreciate it, Cole, man. I've enjoyed this conversation. Have a good one, brother.
And that's all we have for you guys today. We will be back Friday with yet another episode of Reno's Rants. But until then, you guys know the deal. Life is hard and is going to knock you down just like a bull does to a bull rider. Don't let that bull of life walk all over you. Get up, grab the bull by the horns, and take control of your life. Thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode of the Roughnecks Podcast. If you liked today's episode, then please be sure to share it with a friend. You can follow the Roughnecks Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Roughnecks Podcast. Head over to roughneckspodcast.com and grab yourself some Roughnecks merch. Until next time, make sure you grab the bull by the horns and take control of your life. Roughnecks, out.